Welcome again to the Very Basics podcast, a podcast about faith, culture, the Bible, society, and everything else in between. My name is Paul. I am a graduate student at Yale University, and today in this podcast, I have my very dear friend Claire Campbell, who is a graduate student here with me at Yale University, and she is going to help us think about the role that archaeology plays in biblical interpretation. And this is not a particularly common thing that most people who read the Bible think about, but it is a very important subject since the Bible references a lot of geographical spaces and things that can be understood through the method of archaeology. And Claire has a beautiful mind in that world of interpretation, and I wanted to be able to sit with her. So let's go straight to Claire and talk about some of her musings and some of her reflections and readings and things that she's learned over the time. Somebody who is very fascinated about the subject herself. So Claire, I'm thinking probably like a good beginning question would be your story and your journey, right? So let's start with your story.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I love this project. So I am Claire Campbell. I am a master's student at Yale Divinity School in Hebrew Bible / Second Temple Judaism. I'm a bit all over the place. I come from a Protestant Christian background. Right. And I'm from Nashville, Tennessee, where I grew up, and I went to a Catholic school. And at school, I took Latin, and we were also required to take theology classes.
Wow.
And
this is undergrad or high school?
This is high school.
Wow.
So, I mean, Nashville, Tennessee doesn't have the best public education, and I was really fortunate enough to have parents to support me through my high school education financially. I took Latin and theology classes, and it was theology of sophomore year, where we learned about early Christian history. And that was my first, I guess, exposure to religious studies at a very early stage in my life. And I instantly fell in love with it. Early Christian and Judaic studies. And from there, also during high school, I told my parents what I was interested in studying for college, which was ancient religion.
Nice.
And my dad, who is a Methodist minister, has a New Testament academic background.
Nice.
So he has done this work and is familiar with the field and how to be successful and competitive in it. And he encouraged me at a very young age to go on a dig. So at 17 years old, I went to Israel on a dig. It was Hippos Susa, which is a Roman site right on the Sea of Galilee. And at the site, it has a bathhouse and a church and sanctuaries and a little theater. And they have been digging for like 10-something years at this point. So I went when I was 17 for a couple weeks, and I absolutely fell in love with archaeology. I had no idea what I was getting into. So senior year of high school, I knew exactly what I wanted to do and where I wanted to work.
Wow.
Ancient world in Israel.
Senior year of high school.
When I was in high school.
That's impressive.
And I know, and that doesn't happen with a lot of people.
No. Definitely not me. So, yeah.
So the chances of that happening were absolutely wild. I loved the work, both the mental and the physical work in the field and outside of the field. So from high school, I found the program I was interested in classical studies. So primarily focusing on the ancient Greek and Roman world. And my research led me to focusing on the Roman imperial world.
Wow.
And from there, I always still had kind of a heart for religious studies. And I continued Jewish studies, and I found a professor, Spencer Allen. Thank you so much, Spencer Allen, for teaching me Hebrew 3 years, like one-on-one.
Wow.
Yeah, on top of all of the other things he had to do as a professor. So from there, I decided to stick to religious studies if I can, while also wanting to stay in archaeology, which there are not many programs that do that.
Yes.
Or have professionals
who do that, yes.
who you can work with who do that. It's already very limited in a already very limited field.
Right.
And I discovered Yale Divinity School during the application projects for graduate school, and it was a great fit and a really good jumping off point, great connections, great thinkers, both in the Divinity School and in the Religious Studies department. So it was a very obvious answer of where I would come to start my graduate career. So I am here. I have been digging in Israel for the past couple of years.
I was going to ask you that. Yeah.
So with the pandemic, as it affected many people, it affected my ability to dig during my undergraduate career. And so it wasn't until last year that I was like back in the field. So I went on a dig when I was 17. And I had been dying to go on a dig since. And it wasn't until last year that I got back out there. And I was like, oh, my God.
Finally.
Yes. And I was like, am I mentally and physically still up for this type of work? Because that's a long time ago.
It is, yeah.
And it was like riding a bike. It was just as amazing as the first experience. And I learned so much. I spent the summer at Hukok, which is actually on the other side of the Sea of Galilee from the site I worked at when I was in high school. And it is directed by Jody Magnus from Chapel Hill. It is a Roman synagogue north of Tiberias with beautiful mosaics depicting biblical narratives as well as other passages from Jewish literature. So I will be, hopefully, fingers crossed, back there this summer, working with this team again.
Awesome.
And neighbors with some classmates working at some other sites, hopefully. So that is where I fit in this field.
This is like so rich, so rich with all the things, like the way your interests evolved, your parents' involvement, mentors through school, like going on the actual field, right? To, get dirty and dig and
let's get dirty.
Do other fun things. Yeah. But let's take a pause just in case somebody's listening and doesn't know, because we keep saying dig, like we keep using go on a dig. Can you expand a little bit more on that?
Yes.
Like what is that? What does that entail? What has your experience on a dig been?
Digging, as in an archeological excavation, is the physical labor involved with excavating and uncovering ancient sites.
Yes.
So it's a generic term. We use it in Native American archaeology, South American archaeology. It's user-friendly. So it's literal digging.
Yeah.
There's not much of a science to the labor.
Right.
And it is a destructive process.
Right.
Uncovering and exposing these structures and, if you're lucky, art.
Right.
To the elements once again.
Nice.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the dig in your experience. So, paint a picture of how the dig looks like. So on a daily basis, you are on the ground. What do you do? How many people are there? Like when you discover something, what are some of the things that you found? Like, how interesting is that experience?
I do not want this to dissuade anyone from going on a dig in the future, because I highly recommend that anyone in any field participate in a dig, because it is truly something unique. So in a daily life on a dig, depending on where you are, in Israel, we wake up at 4 a.m. in the morning. We are out in the field by 5 a.m. We put up the tarps to cover us during the workday and excavate, log finds, and we are done by like 12, maybe 1 o'clock. Okay, cool. So you're out there for like 7 something hours, including, you know, coffee breaks, breakfast, snacks. It's not entirely brutal, but it is hot, because projects, especially projects by American institutions, are in the summer. So yeah, it is 5 or 6 days a week, 5 to 12 outside. It is dusty, it is dirty, and you are probably in the best shape of your life on a dig. You very quickly become just like buff.
Because it's physical work.
It is a lot of physical work. And depending on the site, you have to like hike up or down from
depending
the road.
on where you're
so
going,
you're like hiking maybe like a mile to get to your site before even digging. It's intense. It's very intense. And students quickly learn whether or not this is something they want to pursue. And non-professionals quickly fall in love with it. I know many people, many like post-career people who go to Israel every summer for vacation to dig. Like that's what they spend their vacation on.
Wow.
So it is so easy to fall in love with. And you meet and you work with great people every year.
Awesome. I'm yet to go on a dig. It's going to be this summer. So,
it is going to be this summer.
So all of this is for me as much as it is for you listening.
And hopefully we will literally be working and staying like miles from each other.
I'm sure,
Not at the same site, but very close in proximity to each other.
Makes sense. Talk to us about some of the findings, some of the things that you typically would find, and some of the interesting findings that you have experienced so far.
A lot of pottery shards. And actually last year, some students in one of the areas discovered a deposit of like thrown away shards. So just buckets, like hundreds of buckets of just pottery were brought back to the place we were staying to be washed and to be cleaned and identified. So pottery is a big one, and ceramics are incredibly valuable to our understanding of dating. Architectural features, so boundaries, foundations, wells. I've worked with a couple of wells and cisterns, courtyards, identifying what's inside and outside of a structure. Hakok has been an active site for many years, so it's monumental. So the synagogue itself has been uncovered, and a lot of the work has been in the periphery of the synagogue, in the courtyard or in certain aisles to uncover mosaics. So it can be as exciting as a brand new mosaic or columns, or it can be as minor as a piece of glass. Or a nail. But no matter what you're finding, any find is exciting.
Yes, it is exciting.
After the first couple weeks, first day, students are super excited and they pick up a rock. They're like, is this pottery? Like, no, it's a rock.
It's a rock.
And eventually they get sick of pottery and they stop collecting it until the ceramic expert goes on this lecture about the significance and the importance of ceramic studies. And then they start to be a little bit more careful. So it's a broad amount of things. And archaeology as a field continues to expand, not only thinking about structures and art and wares such as like ceramics or glass, but also environment.
Yeah.
Which is something I am personally interested in.
Right. Like all of this is like fascinating, and I'm sure there are so many people listening listening to this particular discussion and do not know that this is a thing that people do. I do not know that it even exists in the world, and so I'm very glad that we are doing this. But let's bring it in relationship with the Bible, right? And talk about biblical archaeology in this case. What is it, and how do we begin thinking about how digging the earth, ancient sites, how does that at least help us think about the Bible differently or enhance our understanding of the Bible? But let's talk first of all about like what biblical archaeology is in this sense.
I have two very basic answers.
Right.
So
allowed. Completely allowed.
Biblical archaeology in itself as a field has a huge history. And the origins of biblical archaeology are interested in identifying and placing context within biblical narrative. So digging for the sake of finding something mentioned in the Bible.
Yeah. So maybe Canaan. Right?
Yes. Or, Tel Dan.
Or Tel Dan, right? Yeah.
Any structures built by David or Solomon, monumental things, Jericho, and the destruction of Jericho. It is like,
okay, let's dig and find. Let's dig and find these things, right? Okay, that's great. Yeah, that's clear enough.
It has since then, and I think it's like
evolved.
Things like the Dead Sea Scrolls, which have promoted it to evolve,
right?
Has looked past proving Bible and more in understanding the context in which Bible is received, written, heard in or by an ancient audience.
Yeah.
So biblical archaeology by professionals seems to be limited to a like biblical timeline.
Right.
So Abraham to Ezra.
Basically, yeah.
It is starting to move past this like time frame by incorporating not only like similar context in the same time frame, but also outside of that.
Exactly.
So reception of Bible in the Roman imperial world.
Right.
Which people do not typically identify as biblical, quote unquote, biblical archaeology. It is understood as classical archaeology since it's connected with the Roman Empire. Whether or not it is in Israel, Syria, general Palestine area. So it can be as large as monumental religious structures like synagogues, churches, or public buildings, to Jewish villages, domestic small structures that have, until recently, not been of interest in archaeology, since they are not the big, impressive things.
Right.
I think that biblical archaeology certainly expands from the like chronological lens of just the Hebrew Bible, as well as the New Testament. Especially since historically the Bible has played a big part outside of the Bronze Age to the Roman Empire.
Right.
It continued to be a vital part of social and political context.
Yes. Yeah.
Outside of those periods.
Right. Right. Wow. That's really fast. It sounds like a very, fascinating field of study because it has all these other moving parts, right? It's a little bit of history. It's a little bit of like material culture, just looking at materials that you find. but also like when you bring the Bible in there, then it gets even much more interesting, because then you're thinking about like actual places that at least the Bible references, and you're trying to make sense of that using the tool of archaeology. Interesting, great. So
I have a question
for me. Yeah.
I have a question for you, and I hope, and if you want me to clarify anything I said, that's a very large question, of course, but perhaps we can expand on this generalized understanding of biblical archaeology by you sharing your experience in and outside of academic settings with biblical archaeology.
Right. So I guess it's the first definition that you gave of like where biblical archaeology started from. I think that's what I'm most exposed to at this point in my career, which is, this is what we read about in the Bible. Let's go find out if it's true.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's go dig it out. Okay. Then the point is, so if it is true, then it says something about the authenticity of what we're reading in the text, or at least it gives us an idea of like which side of the spectrum what we're reading in the text falls, right? So I guess that's at this point, like of course I'm reading and thinking much more broader beyond that, but experientially I think that's what it is. That's what it has to
absolutely,
be for me. And I'm sure it's like the same for many people, probably.
Yeah. And I think it has to do with categorizing finds and time and places and peoples, so that they fit into these nice little boxes for us to study individually. But as much as you have done work on the reception of Bible,
right,
not only in antiquity, but today,
contemporary world,
I believe archaeology has a very similar place when considering narrative and religious literature.
Right. Yeah, and that like the second role that you talked about that archaeology plays, I think it's very, very, very important, because like all things, it grows, it expands, right? And it teaches us way more than like verifying textual facts, I mean, I absolutely, and you've completely said it, right? To this day, our understanding of Bible continues to evolve. And just as people in antiquity, in the Bronze Age or in the Roman world, received and interacted with these stories and these texts individually and in a community, whether through buildings, art, displaying these narratives in these settings. We do that. We have glass windows. We do.
And these beautiful, beautiful cathedrals that have these wall paintings or mosaics. And not only do they depict like biblical narratives from the Hebrew Bible and New Testament, they also bring in a modern context. So I'm thinking of like the St. Louis Cathedral. I don't know if you've been there.
I've not.
But it brings in a lot of significant social figures from like modern America.
Right.
And displays them with his biblical historical figures like Jeremiah. So someone like Martin Luther King is standing next to Jeremiah, or Mother Teresa and Abraham in these settings today.
Right.
So just as we interact and display these stories and settings, so did people in antiquity.
So did they do, Amazing. So let's talk a little bit also about the value of archaeology, in understanding the Bible. Like the narratives of the Bible, the people in the Bible, the lives of the cultures, the languages, like anything that we find in the Bible. How does archaeology help us discern that?
I think archaeology not only provides an abundant information regarding these like monumental historical events the Bible mentions. But more importantly, in my opinion, is the uncovering and the consideration of reality and daily lives and what that plays in narrative. So relationships, whether between like families or tribes or these like larger communities, social structures and politics. I am especially interested in like economics.
Me too.
Yeah, right. It's a fascinating discussion when considering how economics impacts social and political systems. So how do these things which seem kind of secondhand and not very apparent in the text, how can we use the evidence from archaeology to perhaps expand our lens of understanding and include not only the people and the places the Bible mentions, but adding more to that. So women, children, slaves, marginalized groups of people, rich, poor. What can the text and material tell us about the realities of everyday life in antiquity?
That's fascinating because most of the time we are focused on like the big findings. Okay, where was Solomon's temple? You know, and then, you know, we go out and like try to dig and try to find the exact temple. But there may be like very mundane things that we can find that will tell us about the exact same things that you're telling us. Systems, like how do you discern systems, social systems and political systems and economic systems by the things that you find around, right? By the things that you find when you're digging or when you dig the earth. And I think that's like one big fascinating thing about archaeology that is drawing me to like take it a lot more seriously at this point in my career. Because, you know, as much as we know a lot from the text, from the biblical text, we can also know a whole lot more by the material remains that these ancient people left behind.
And these are historically things overlooked, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
we've overlooked them.
When thinking about our own history and where we are from, it's limited to a very specific narrative and agenda. And certainly, while this is a religious text and has been handled as such by many different communities throughout history, it still can play a role in showing how other voices have been silenced or considered not significant enough
I like that word.
to bring into these stories.
Yeah.
And this is slowly and surely for like decades becoming more and more prominent to talk about, not only in archaeology, but in biblical studies. And to me, it is like these really small finds, both in the text and in the field, that make the Bible seem more relatable to me and to my own history. Just an example. This is super, it's so small.
Go for it.
I found a little ceramic dish plate thing in the field, about the size of a palm. And it was like, oh, it's a tiny little saucer plate, right? It was whole, it was intact.
Okay.
It had been it was previously a bottom of a vase, and it had been cut off to use as a top for something. How many times have I done that? How many times do I use the wrong like Tupperware lid, and I like force it to fit, or I use like a plate to like cover a bowl.
Oh yeah, I do it all the time
because I haven't like done my dishes. Yeah. I'm desperate.
I'm just picking whatever I can find.
Exactly. It's like how many times have I done these like very silly, I guess, and not silly and insignificant things to like, I don't know, get through my day. Yeah,
just survive.
So when it was pointed out to me that had been repurposed in a sense as a lid, I was like, I don't know why, but this is really resonating with me.
This is what
especially since I'm constantly losing lids and caps and like anything. So it's small. It's small and it seems minor and insignificant, but it tells you the story of an individual and a community.
Yeah. I was gonna go there, but I think you started us off very well. Which is when we will be wrapping up. But I think this is important. Like, so how to make meaning out of the thing that you find, right? Which is, you started telling us a little bit about that, right? You found this thing, looked at it, and you could tell, of course, with the help of other people in the community, people who have experience, experts, and things like that this thing is a lid that has been repurposed for something similar, but like this is not the actual purpose. And you begin to think about the individual who was using that particular finding, and that's fascinating. And I just want you to like give us an example of how maybe an expert would begin to start making meaning out of something that they find, or at least begin to predict what this could be, or what this could tell us about the ancient world or the people that used that particular finding.
That's a great question. And it is slowly, in my case, not becoming secondhand, but becoming common sense.
Right.
So, I mean, I've taken these like art and archaeology classes that focuses on grand Greek architecture and art and the history of it, and how it was like great in the classical period, and that is like the epitome of art in like Western culture. So I took those courses and I heard and I read these things, and it hasn't really been till recently, especially being in the field and also in religious studies, where I'm having professionals as well as my colleagues challenging me to not so quickly identify and categorize things. So looking at architecture and seeing, I don't know,
maybe a pile of stones or something.
Yeah. So the thing that comes to mind is like a cistern. I've been thinking about those a lot. And cisterns were built on continually. So these were like constantly used or filled in. So uncovering one and finding that it's not so clear cut as you would imagine it would be. What would the space that a cistern has also be used for?
Right.
Compost. Like literal garbage. People literally throwing garbage into
something that looks like a cistern.
And just getting their junk out of the way. So it has been like conversations I've had where we're just like standing and looking at something where someone is like, okay, I'm trying to put myself in that context. What would this translate to me? This isn't just a sculpture to a god. Like it is a portrayal of women. In elite culture, and like how would that have impacted the 99%? who are not
People,
that.
Yeah.
So it takes practice, and it
tell
takes
you what, yeah.
people encouraging you to think outside of the box.
Yeah.
That previous scholarship has kind of set up for us.
Yes. Yeah.
And this is, of course, absolutely resonating with biblical studies.
I'm sure. I'm so
And
sure.
how we approach and read the Bible.
Yeah. Yeah. This is great. Like, I can see the diligence in, to use a churchy word, faithfulness in, you know, the care involved in trying to make sense of something that you find and trying to be as truthful as possible, acknowledging what you know and what you don't know, and saying that, this could be this. This is what we know typically of it, but it doesn't look like it anymore. It could be something else, and appreciating it for what it is. I think like that's like, I don't know, like the most diligent job ever.
Diligence is admitting you don't always know or you can't see clearly.
Yes.
And not enough people do that, obviously.
Yeah.
And allowing yourself to admit that you don't necessarily see the intent or the purpose of something opens doors to perhaps identify and recognize other sort of purposes text and material have in ancient or even modern settings.
Yeah. I'm beginning to feel like I appreciate the work of scholars so much more, because like what scholars have to go through to make knowledge accessible to the rest of the world is a lot.
It is.
That sometimes people out there don't appreciate, right? Like, or don't know what to appreciate. Like, basically, you know, you just pick a textbook in a bookstore and you're like, oh yeah, somebody wrote a book, but they probably went through like years and years of training.
I mean, not only do you have to make it accessible to a community of people outside of your field, you have to first get it get it through your own field.
Get it through your own field
and get
first.
people to not like agree, but like be okay with it.
Be okay with it. Yes.
Like this isn't awful. So yeah, you can
you can put it out.
You can now put it out there and not use these big fancy words and just dig in.
Yeah. Awesome. Let's wrap it up here, Claire.
Okay.
This is amazing, but it cannot go on forever. So so let's talk about resources, right? Things that you would recommend for people listening. Maybe this is the first time somebody's hearing anything like the term biblical archaeology, or even like what archaeology has to do with biblical interpretation, or like, you know, like having a glimpse of what archaeology really is and what it entails. And they want to read more, or they want to experience it more. They want to understand it better. Like, where do they go? Names of, you know, people that have mentored you, whatever, resources.
Yeah. Generally speaking, outside of like my own interests, things like the Journal of Biblical Literature. So JBL. If you go to their website, you can like flick through their publications and they have a archaeology and biblical studies tab, and you can click that and it shows you recent publications through them.
Nice.
And there it goes back like 20 years. Biblical Archeological Review also has a similar resource.
Yes. And
they post both in their magazine and online like popular books. So books that scholars are like, yes, this is great for the general public to learn about. Right. Personally, some of my absolute favorite work, or work that I'm excited to look more into in the next couple months, I will start off with Jody Magnus, since I'm working with her, and her work has really been foundational in my interest for years. So she has a book, Archeology of the Holy Land, and one of my favorites, Stone and Dung, Oil and Spit.
Oh my God.
So really a lot about daily life in the ancient Israel.
Right.
Also in the life of Jesus as well, for those who would be interested in learning more about that.
Yes.
Andrea Berlin from Boston University has done a lot on daily life and antiquity as well in different Roman imperial context, So as early as Iron Age into the Roman Empire and later. I've not read this yet, but Christine Garraway at Hebrew Union College, has a couple of works on children in ancient Israel.
That's nice.
I'm excited to read about because we are constantly talking about women and slaves. But I don't think about kids when I'm looking at the text. I mean, they're mentioned, but especially in like Hebrew Bible, it's just not something I'm thinking about. So I'm really excited to dig into that work. And
that's a book, right?
Yes, that's a book that's out. And I think she's got like 2 maybe on it. So if you can find her on her Hebrew Union College page, and her publications will be there. And then there's Oded Borowski, I think I'm saying that right. From Emory. He has a great daily life and biblical times book that has been incredibly helpful to me and my interest in economics in ancient Israel. It was published in 2003, so it's been a little bit, like but they continue to do really interesting work in Emory and outside of Emory as well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I love it, Claire. This is amazing. I would just let you advise anybody who is thinking about like a career in archaeology or thinking about like the Bible and archaeology. Like, what advice from your own experience and everything? What advice would you give to that person?
Embrace interdisciplinary work. It is not easy finding programs or professionals who, I would say, practice what they preach when approaching interdisciplinary work. And I also think, as you and others have done who I admire so much, really making your own curriculum at programs. So whether you are just getting into undergrad or looking at graduate schools, understanding you have resources at an institution, but you are not limited to those resources. It's a matter of reaching out, emailing someone at a different school or on a project and making those connections. Because I, by chance, did that. and I'm still here. So it seems to work. Just cold email, like shamelessly cold email or tweet people to get their attention. Shamelessly, exactly. I absolutely believe in that. I mean, do the work you're interested in.
Do it.
Like, it's not always easy. I am very fortunate to have learned so early on that I was interested in religious studies and archaeology. And once you have a sense of what it is you are very passionate about, hold on to it and don't let anyone say you can't.
Wow. That's fascinating. Thank you so much, Claire. We're going to wrap it up here. And I'm very confident that a lot of people listening to this learned a lot from your sharing. And
I sure hope so.
And all of it. It's setting.
This has been great. I love talking about dirt.
Yes.
I love getting dirty. I highly recommend that everyone, at least once in your life, go on a dig, whether it's in America, wherever you are. Someone has a dig where you are. We dig everywhere. We dig up everything. So get out there and get a trowel or something, put some gloves on.
That's right. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening to the podcast. I'm going to see you some other time when we make another podcast.